Tov, everyone. Ani akshe et lev paro. I will harden Pharaoh's heart. In this week's Parsha, Vayechi, God inflicts the first 7 plagues upon the Egyptian people. When I was reading this Parsha, I kept asking myself, why must God harden Pharaoh's heart? If God is omnipotent, and his goal was to free the Israelites from the yoke of Egypt, why did he harden Pharaoh's heart after each plague, ensuring the ever greater suffering of the Egyptian people? Could he have not just freed the Israelites from the beginning? Or if that's too simple, why not just free them after the first plague? After all, Pharaoh saw the immense suffering of his people when their primary water source, the Nile, turned to blood. But even so, he hardened his heart and wouldn't free the Israelites. But what about the frogs, which covered the entire land and terrified the people? Or the insects, or the wild animals, or the pestilence? Or the boils, which were so painful and so horrible that they afflicted all of Egypt with agony not enough? For Pharaoh? For God? Why did our God, Elohei Chesed v'Rachamim, God of loving kindness and compassion, have to cause so much agony for the Egyptians? And why was the mechanism of ensuring this agony the hardening of Pharaoh's heart? Why did God insist that Pharaoh turn away from the suffering of his own people for so long? The Ramban explains that Pharaoh and the Egyptians deserved punishment for enslaving the Israelites and for being such oppressive taskmasters upon them. He says that the severity of their sins made God prevent Pharaoh from being able to repent. On the other hand, Rashi believes that the plagues were not just about the Egyptians, but were also about the Israelites and their perception of God. The plagues were God's way of getting the Israelites to fear him. They allowed God to demonstrate his true might to the Israelites. If God can do that to the Egyptians, imagine what he could do to us if we break his covenant. I believe that God hardened Pharaoh's heart in order to demonstrate to us the perils of doing so. By hardening his heart, by turning away from the suffering of his own people, Pharaoh allowed much more destruction and suffering than was necessary. So perhaps this story is a cautionary tale. Perhaps it's meant to warn us about our stubbornness, about what happens when we fail to admit that we're wrong. Pharaoh shows us how we can lose our humanity when we harden our hearts in the face of suffering. In her beautiful Devar Torah last week, Emily brought up one of my personal heroes, Reverend Billy Kyles from Memphis. In 1968, Reverend Kyles beckoned Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to Memphis to advocate on behalf of the city's striking sanitation workers. Among the lowest people in our society, those whose job it was to pick up everyone else's garbage, the sanitation workers were striking for better wages and working conditions. Their simple slogan, "I am a man," in its almost pitiful humility, demonstrates the depravity, the depth of the depravity of our society in failing to recognize them as such. Yes, they were striking for more money, but almost more importantly, to be recognized as men, as fellow humans. Unlike Pharaoh, Dr. King did not harden his heart. From his position of national prominence, already a recipient of the Nobel Prize, he came to the backwater of Memphis, Tennessee, to help those who needed him most. We all know that by coming to Memphis, Dr. King made the ultimate sacrifice. but he did not sacrifice his morals. He did not harden his heart. The Torah uses 3 verbs to describe the hardening of Pharaoh's heart: kasheh, chazak, and kaved. Why do we need 3 verbs that are used to mean essentially the same thing? I think the use of multiple roots demonstrates that we can harden our hearts, in multiple ways. We can harden it through ignorance, by retreating away from the troubles of the world. We can harden it through stubbornness, by choosing not to help, or not to compromise, or not to admit that we are wrong. Finally, we can harden it through indifference, by seeing suffering or sadness or need and turning away from them, whether because we are too busy, because of an unwillingness to expose ourselves emotionally, or simply because of the resignation that we can't possibly make a difference. May we learn this lesson from Pharaoh: to strive against ignorance, against stubbornness, and against indifference. And may we always work to soften our hearts, not harden them. Keni Hiratzon, may it be God's will.
Amen.